My sister texted me on the eve of her high society wedding to casually announce she had drained my entire life savings to pay for her imported orchids and a celebrity DJ. She thought she was untouchable because my parents had spent 33 years enabling her theft. I just stood in the opulent bridal suite of the Atlanta Grand Estate and smiled at her reflection in the mirror. She had no idea that my so-called boring office job gave me the power to freeze every single dime of her new family wealth. Before I dive into the chaos that brought down two prominent Atlanta dynasties, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch your family sacrifice your future to fund their delusions. The bridal suite smelled of heavy hairspray, expensive champagne, and desperate entitlement. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling manicured gardens that would soon host 500 of Atlanta's most elite residents. Inside the room, a team of professional stylists hovered over my 28-year-old sister Chantel. She was scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring the woman carefully applying setting powder to her cheekbones. I was sipping sparkling water, counting down the minutes until I could escape back to my own peace when my phone vibrated in my designer bag. I pulled it out and read the text message. Check your savings. I wired the $150,000 to my planner for the celebrity DJ and the imported orchids. Dad said you would not mind since you are single and do not need a house fund anytime soon. Thanks, sis. I read the words 3 times, the casual cruelty of it, the absolute lack of hesitation. I looked across the suite at Chantel. She did not even glance my way. She was busy admiring her fresh manicure in the vanity mirror, acting as if she had just borrowed a sweater instead of stealing my financial security. I walked over to where my mother Vivian was meticulously adjusting the train of Chantel's custom Vera Wang gown. Vivian wore an emerald silk dress that cost more than my first car bought with funds from my father's megachurch congregation. My father, Pastor Joseph, led a flock of thousands preaching prosperity, while his own house was built on financial exploitation. I held my phone out, stepping directly into Vivian's line of sight. I kept my voice perfectly level. "Read this, Mom." Vivian sighed, visibly annoyed by the interruption. She glanced at the screen for barely 2 seconds before swatting my hand away. She did not gasp. She did not look shocked. Instead, she smoothed an imaginary wrinkle on Chantel's veil and clicked her tongue. "Stop making a fuss over a few dollars." Kendra, Vivian said, her tone dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for unruly children. "Chantel is marrying Preston Sterling tomorrow. The Sterlings are old money. White buckhead old money. We have to look the part to secure our place in this circle. You can make that money back crunching numbers at whatever little cubicle you work in. A few dollars. $150,000 of my money accumulated through grueling 80-hour work weeks, dismissed as a minor family tax." The sheer audacity hung in the air. This was not a sudden betrayal. This was the culmination of a lifetime where my sweat funded Chantel's vanity. "Mom," I said, maintaining my composure while a cold fire ignited in my chest. "That was my money. You and Dad authorized her to forge my approval on a bank transfer. That is a felony." Vivian turned to me, her eyes narrowing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the makeup artist would not hear the hostility, though they were already pretending to be invisible. "Do not use that word in this room," Kendra, Vivian hissed. "We put a roof over your head. We raised you. It is your duty as the older sister to contribute to this family elevation. Do you know what this wedding means for your father's ministry? When the Sterling family merges with ours, your father will have access to the most elite political donors in Georgia. You are being selfish, as always." I looked at my mother. The woman who had repeatedly used my existence as a stepping stone for Chantel. Selfish, I repeated the word, letting it settle over the room. "Like when I was 19, and my credit was destroyed because you put the household electricity bill in my name and let it default. Or like when Dad took the $50,000 inheritance Grandma left specifically for my tuition and gave it to Chantel for a pageant tour." "Keep your voice down," Vivian snapped, looking nervously toward the suite doors. "You have a job, a decent little accounting job. You sit at a desk all day. Chantel is entering high society. She has an image to maintain. The Sterlings expect a certain caliber of event. You should be proud to help your sister secure her future, instead of throwing a tantrum because no man has asked for your hand yet. Chantel finally looked up from her phone, batting her newly attached eyelashes. Seriously, Kendra, do not ruin my vibe today. Preston is already stressed about the rehearsal dinner tonight. Just let it go. I will pay you back when Preston and I combine our accounts next month. She was lying and we all knew it. There would be no payback. Just like there was no payback for the college laptop she broke in a fit of rage, or the car repairs I funded when she crashed my vehicle. I was the family scapegoat, the quiet workhorse expected to silently pull the plow while they rode in the carriage. But things had changed. They still saw me as the timid girl who used to cry in her room when they raided her piggy bank. They saw a woman with a boring office job who spent too much time looking at spreadsheets. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the lapel of my custom-tailored blazer. I looked right at Chantel, who was now sipping a mimosa, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just committed grand larceny. I hope you paid the vendors in cash, Chantel, I said, my voice cutting through the soft background music playing in the suite. Chantel frowned, the rim of her champagne glass hovering near her lips. What are you talking about? I wired it directly to the event planner. I smiled. A genuine bright smile that made Vivian take a hesitant step back. That is unfortunate, I said. Because wire transfers over $100,000 flag federal fraud algorithms if the signature does not match the account holder biometric key. And since I just reported the transfer as unauthorized and fraudulent, the bank has automatically frozen the receiving accounts. Chantel scoffed, rolling her eyes. You are bluffing. You would not call the bank on me. Dad would kill you. I did not just call the bank, Chantel. I initiated a direct freeze protocol. I tapped the screen of my phone, showing her the confirmation email from the fraud department. The money is locked. The planner cannot access it. The DJ cannot be paid. Those imported orchids you love so much will be rotting on the loading dock by tomorrow morning. Vivian grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. Kendra Washington, you call them back right now and authorize that transfer. Do not play games with me. The Sterlings are arriving for the rehearsal dinner in 3 hours. We cannot have vendors threatening to walk out. I pulled my arm away with enough force to make Vivian stumble slightly. Do not touch me, Mom. And I cannot reverse a federal fraud freeze with a simple phone call. It triggers a mandatory investigation. The funds are suspended until the authorities determine who forged my digital signature. Chantel stood up, the silk robe slipping off her shoulder. Her confident smirk was entirely gone, replaced by a look of rising panic. Kendra, fix it. Preston will freak out if the planner calls him about missing funds. He told his parents my family was covering this portion of the wedding. If they find out the payment bounced, they will look at us like we are trash. They already look at you like you are trash. Chantel, I replied calmly. You just cover it up with expensive dresses and Dad's church money. But sure, let us see how Preston handles a little financial hiccup. As if on cue, the heavy double doors of the bridal suite flew open, hitting the wall with a loud crack. Preston Sterling stormed into the room. He was wearing his country club golf attire, but his face was drained of all color, pale and sweating profusely. His eyes darted around the room until they landed on Chantel. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire future collapse. Preston, baby, Chantel cooed quickly, trying to mask her panic with a sweet, oblivious smile. You are not supposed to see me before the rehearsal dinner. It is bad luck. Preston ignored her completely. He marched straight to the center of the room, his chest heaving, holding his phone in a white-knuckle grip. He did not look like the arrogant, untouchable heir to the Sterling real estate fortune right now. He looked utterly terrified. Chantel, my platinum card just declined, Preston said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. I tried to pay the valet at the club and it declined. I called the concierge desk at my private bank. They said my entire family trust is locked. Everything is frozen. Preston whirled around, his eyes locking onto me. He spotted me standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding my phone, looking entirely too calm for the nuclear fallout happening in the suite. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, his golf shoes thudding heavily against the hardwood floor. He thrust a manicured finger inches from my face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply met his panicked gaze with absolute stillness. I do not know what low-level bank teller tricks you pulled, He snapped, his voice dripping with all the entitled venom of a Buckhead Country Club heir. But you better unlock my accounts, Kendra. You have exactly 10 seconds to fix this before I ruin your miserable life. Vivian gasped loudly, clutching the bodice of her emerald silk dress, as if my very existence had soiled it. She rushed forward, stepping between Preston and me, physically shielding the golden groom with her own body. She pointed a shaking finger at my chest. Apologize to the man of the hour right now, Kendra. I will not have your bitter single-woman jealousy destroy the most important day of your sister's life. Fix whatever computer glitch you caused at your little data entry job, and beg for his forgiveness before your father hears about this. I looked at my mother. I looked at the way she instinctively cowered before a man who had not worked a honest day in his life, simply because his last name was printed on a few buildings downtown. I slowly raised my hand and flicked a microscopic speck of lint off the lapel of my bespoke blazer. I am not a bank teller, Preston, I said. My voice dropped to a terrifyingly quiet register that forced the entire room to stop and listen. I am a senior partner at Apex Financial Forensics. And I did not lock your accounts over Chantel's petty theft. The Securities and Exchange Commission did. I just handed them the key. Preston's hand froze in midair. The arrogant sneer on his face faltered, replaced by a sudden and sickening confusion. He blinked, shaking his head, as if trying to physically dislodge the words I had just spoken. You are lying, he stammered, taking a half step back. You do tax returns for small businesses. Chantel told me you just crunch numbers in a cubicle. I turned my gaze to my sister, who was now gripping the edge of her makeup vanity so hard her knuckles had turned ashen. Is that what you told him, Chantel? That is cute. But no. My firm tracks missing money for the federal government. For the last 8 months, a team of 20 forensic accountants under my direct supervision has been mapping the Sterling Family Trust. We have been tracking the millions your father siphoned from local charities and shell companies in the Caymans. Vivian let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, waving her hands in the air as if trying to shoo away a pesky insect. Oh, Preston, do not listen to her. She watches too many crime shows. She is just trying to get attention because nobody is looking at her today. She has always been resentful of anyone doing better than her. Mom, I said, cutting through her delusion like a surgical blade. The Sterlings are broke. Worse than broke. They are actively under federal investigation for embezzlement and massive tax fraud. The only reason they have not been indicted yet is because the feds needed a biometric trigger to prove the domestic accounts were actively laundering the offshore funds. They needed proof that the money was moving across borders in real time. I took a deliberate step toward Preston, who looked like he might throw up on the expensive Persian rug. And guess what, Preston? Your beautiful, brilliant bride just gave us that exact trigger. When Chantel forged my digital signature to steal $150,000 from me this morning, she did not just transfer it to the wedding planner. She routed it through a joint account you opened for her last week. That account was directly linked to the offshore shell companies we were monitoring. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting the absolute horror of the situation sink into their minds. The algorithm flagged the massive unauthorized domestic wire immediately. I continued. It cross-referenced the IP address and the forged signature with the Cayman accounts. Chantel's clumsy theft was the undeniable link the SEC needed. She blew your cover for some imported orchids. She literally locked the entire Sterling estate grid because she wanted a celebrity DJ. Chantel let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. The silk robe slipped off her shoulders as she lunged toward Preston, grabbing the collar of his shirt. You told me the trust was untouchable. You said the money was completely hidden from the IRS. You promised me we would be billionaires by next year. You said I could spend whatever I wanted. Preston shoved her away with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Shut up, you idiot. Do not say another word in front of her. He glared at me, his chest heaving, his face turning a mottled, furious red. His true colors, the ones masked by private school education and tailored suits, finally bled through. You have no idea who you are dealing with. My father's lawyers will bury you. We own judges in this city. We own politicians. You think some diversity hire at a boutique accounting firm is going to take down the Sterling family? I will have your credentials stripped by tomorrow morning and sue you into oblivion. I laughed. It was a genuine bright sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers of the bridal suite. You cannot strip credentials when your assets are seized by the federal government, Preston. Your father cannot afford his lawyers today. He cannot even afford a cup of coffee. The freeze is absolute. Real estate, liquid assets, shell corporations, all of it is locked under federal mandate. You do not have a cent to your name. Vivian refused to accept reality. She lunged forward and grabbed my shoulders, shaking me frantically. Stop it. Stop these lies right now. You are just jealous that Chantel is marrying into a prominent white family and you are going to die alone. You are trying to sabotage her wedding because you are bitter and hateful. Turn the money back on Kendra. Call your little boss and tell them it was a mistake. I pried her fingers off my jacket one by one, staring directly into her panicked eyes. There is no money to turn back on Mom. The wedding is unfunded. The sterling fortune is an illusion built on stolen funds. You are about to marry your golden child to a man facing 10 to 20 years in federal prison, and you facilitated it. The room descended into absolute chaos. The professional makeup artists who had been standing frozen against the wall, trying to blend in with the wallpaper, silently packed their kits and slipped out the door, recognizing a sinking ship when they saw one. Chantel collapsed onto the velvet chaise lounge, sobbing hysterically into her hands, wailing about how her life was ruined and how she would be a laughingstock on social media. She was not crying because her fiancé was a criminal. She was crying because the money was gone. Preston was pacing the floor like a caged animal, muttering to himself, pulling at his hair, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. Vivian was hyperventilating, fanning herself with a glossy wedding program, still muttering that it must be a mistake, that the Sterlings would fix it, that my father would call the mayor and sort it all out before the guests arrived. They were so consumed by their panic and their desperate need to maintain their elite facade that they did not even realize the true disaster had not even hit them yet. Then Preston's phone rang. The sharp, intrusive sound cut through Chantel's sobbing and Vivian's frantic denials. Preston yanked the phone from his pocket as if it had burned him. The caller ID flashed brightly in his trembling hand. It was his father, Richard Sterling. Preston answered it, his voice cracking, shedding all pretense of authority. Dad, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me the bank just flagged something small. Because the suite was dead quiet. Now I could hear Richard Sterling's voice blasting through the earpiece. The older man sounded completely unhinged, his usual refined southern drawl replaced by a panicked, breathless shout that echoed off the walls. Preston, where the hell are you? The cards are declining, all of them. I am standing in the lobby of the Buckhead Country Club with the event manager. The final $200,000 payment for tonight's rehearsal dinner just bounced. The caterer is threatening to pack up the food and walk out. The florists are refusing to set the tables. They are demanding cash right now. Preston and I cannot get a single dollar out of the trust. Preston dropped his phone. It clattered heavily against the hardwood floor, the screen cracking straight down the middle. But his father's voice continued to echo through the speaker, demanding answers, demanding money that simply did not exist anymore. Preston stared at the cracked screen, then slowly looked up at me, his eyes wide with the realization that I had completely dismantled his entire reality in under 5 minutes. The rehearsal dinner was in 3 hours, and the Sterling dynasty could not even afford to serve water to their guests. Fast forward 3 hours. The Buckhead Country Club sparkled with the kind of oppressive wealth that usually intimidated people into silence. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and artisanal appetizers. The 200 elite guests laughed and mingled, completely oblivious to the fact that the very ground beneath the Sterling family empire was currently collapsing. I sat at a corner table nursing a club soda, watching the meticulously choreographed disaster unfold with absolute clarity. Behind the scenes, the panic was palpable. By the massive swan ice sculpture near the ballroom entrance, Richard and Patricia Sterling had cornered my parents. I watched Patricia lean in her pastel pink Chanel suit, practically vibrating with indignation. Her voice carried that distinct syrupy southern charm that wealthy white women use right before they try to destroy you. Vivian Joseph. I simply cannot comprehend what sort of banking mishap your people are experiencing, Patricia said, her smile not reaching her cold eyes. Perhaps your local credit union put a hold on the account. I know how strict those urban community banks can be when they see transactions larger than what they are accustomed to handling. We are accustomed to a different standard of liquidity. My father, Pastor Joseph, a man who commanded audiences of 10,000 every Sunday with his booming baritone, was physically shrinking into his tailored tuxedo. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a linen handkerchief, bowing and scraping to the sterlings as if they were royalty. Patricia Richard, I assure you, this is merely a temporary technical error. Joseph stammered, his charismatic facade entirely shattered. We will have the funds cleared immediately. The caterer will not walk out on this dinner, I give you my word. Vivian stood beside him, her fixed, strained smile looking more like a painful grimace. She had spent decades climbing the social ladder of Atlanta, stepping on anyone necessary to reach the top, which usually meant stepping on me. Now facing the exact demographic she had trained Chantel to infiltrate, she looked utterly powerless and humiliated. Richard Sterling sneered, adjusting his gold tie clip while looking down his nose at my father. See that you do, Joseph. We agreed to blend our families because Preston insisted on this modern diversity initiative. But my patience for your financial incompetence is wearing exceptionally thin. The country club manager is threatening to pull the food from the tables. If you embarrass my family tonight, there will not be a wedding tomorrow. The racism was not even disguised anymore. It was right there, laid bare under the crystal chandeliers, and my parents were swallowing it whole, just to maintain their proximity to power. Joseph spun away from the Sterlings, his face a mask of desperate fury. He marched straight across the polished ballroom floor, making a beeline for my table. He did not ask, he did not plead. He reached out and wrapped his large hand violently around my wrist, pulling me half out of my chair. "Fix this!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper, so the nearby guests would not overhear the crack in his holy armor. "You are going to use your savings to cover the caterer tonight. I need $200,000 wired to the club manager right now. Do not embarrass my ministry in front of these white folks." I looked at his hand gripping my wrist. This was the same man who stood at the pulpit preaching about faith and integrity, but behind closed doors he only worshipped status. I remembered being 22, landing my first major accounting contract, and Joseph demanding I sign over my entire commission to his church-building fund to impress local politicians. When I refused, he told the congregation to pray for my selfish, wicked spirit. He had always viewed my hard work as a communal trough for his own ambitions, a seemingly endless resource to fund the golden child lifestyle he provided for Chantel. I did not break eye contact. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my arm away, forcing his grip to break. I adjusted the diamond cuff on my blazer sleeve, making sure he saw the complete lack of fear in my expression. "I would love to help you save face, Dad," I said, offering him a tight, unyielding smile. "But my $150,000 is currently frozen by the federal government as primary evidence in a felony identity theft case. I cannot touch a single dime of my own money. You should probably ask Chantel to pay for the dinner since she is the one who drained my accounts this morning." Joseph froze. The remaining color drained from his face as my words registered. He slowly turned his head to look at Chantel, who was standing a few feet away, pretending to admire a floral arrangement while nervously biting her perfectly manicured nails. Chantel. Joseph barked, his voice rising just enough to turn a few heads at the nearby tables. He closed the distance between them in 2 aggressive strides. "What is Kendra talking about? Did you touch her accounts?" Chantel did not miss a beat. She immediately burst into theatrical, hyperventilating tears. She collapsed against a high-top cocktail table, burying her face in her hands, making sure to cry loudly enough to draw the attention of the nearest elite guests. "It is Kendra's fault," Chantel wailed, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at me through her manufactured tears. "She is ruining my wedding on purpose because she hates me. She set me up to make me look like a thief because she is jealous that I am getting married and she is going to die alone. She manipulated the banking system to humiliate us." The country club manager was closing in his face tight with professional fury, holding a leather folio that contained the bounced $200,000 invoice. He was marching directly toward Richard Sterling and my father, bypassing the trays of caviar and the oblivious society guests. My father saw him coming. Joseph Washington had survived 30 years in the pulpit by mastering the art of the pivot. When reality threatened to expose him, he simply grabbed a microphone and changed the narrative. He reached the small raised platform where the jazz band was playing their soft background set. With a practiced, commanding presence, he held up his hands and smiled. The sheer force of his pastoral charisma forced the room into submission. The band stopped playing. The elite guests turned their attention to the stage. Even the country club manager paused in his tracks, unwilling to cause a public scene, while a prominent religious figure held the floor. "Welcome, family and friends!" Joseph boomed, his voice rolling across the crystal and velvet of the ballroom. He did not sound like a man whose fraudulent empire was actively collapsing. He sounded like a king. "Look around this room. We are gathered here tonight to witness the beautiful blending of two worlds. The Sterling family, with their incredible legacy of building this city, and my own family rooted in faith and community." He paused, letting the wealthy crowd murmur their polite approval. Vivian stood near the ice sculpture, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously between my father and the angry venue staff. She needed him to stall. She needed a miracle. But Joseph did not have a miracle. He only had his favorite scapegoat, me. He looked across the room, finding me sitting quietly at my corner table. The spotlight of his attention dragged 200 pairs of eyes directly to my face. "You know, raising two daughters is a test of a man's faith," Joseph said, chuckling deeply. He pointed a finger at Chantel, who was clinging to Preston's arm, trying to look like a blushing bride instead of a federal suspect. "There is my Chantel, always full of light, always dreaming big. And then there is my oldest, Kendra." He gestured toward me. I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. "Kendra has always been my serious child." Joseph continued, his tone adopting a mock affectionate cadence that made my skin crawl. "Always guarding her pennies. Always playing by the strictest rules. I remember when Chantel turned 21. She had her heart set on this beautiful little Mercedes. Just a starter car for a young woman stepping into the world. Her sister here was already working in her accounting cubicle, making a decent salary. I asked Kendra to do the sisterly thing and co-sign the lease. Just a signature to help her little sister out." He shook his head, offering the crowd a look of exaggerated, humorous exasperation. Kendra flat out refused. She gave us a spreadsheet presentation on depreciation instead. I tell you, some people just do not understand the grace of giving. She has always been a little jealous of her sister's shine. The room erupted into polite, condescending laughter. Patricia Sterling let out a dry, rattling chuckle, whispering something behind her hand to another buckhead socialite. Vivian nodded along from the sidelines, looking at me with absolute disdain, silently commanding me to take the humiliation and smile. They all thought it was a charming, funny anecdote about sibling rivalry. A classic story of the stingy, bitter older sister and the vibrant, deserving younger one. I did not smile, but I did not look away either. I remembered being 19 years old. I remembered applying for my very first apartment near my college campus, excited to finally have a space of my own. I remembered the leasing agent sliding my application back across the desk with a look of deep pity. I had pulled my credit report that afternoon and found $10,000 in unpaid electric, water, and gas bills tied directly to my Social Security number. My parents had used my identity to keep the lights on in their sprawling 5-bedroom suburban fortress when church donations were low. They had defaulted on the payments, ignored the collection notices, and left me with a credit score in the low 400s. It took me 6 grueling years to repair the damage they did to my name. I lived on instant ramen and worked 3 separate jobs to pay off the debt they racked up funding their designer wardrobes. Co-sign a luxury car lease for Chantel. I barely had enough credit to secure a prepaid cell phone plan at the time. My father was standing on a stage entertaining a room full of millionaires by mocking the financial trauma he had personally inflicted on me. I do not stand up. I do not shout. Anger is a cheap, useless emotion, and I prefer currency that actually holds value. I reached out and picked up my phone from the white linen tablecloth. I opened my encrypted messaging app. I selected the chat with my lead investigator, Tasha. I typed 3 words: initiate phase 2. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the table. I picked up my club soda and took a slow, refreshing sip. On the stage, Joseph was wrapping up his performance. He had successfully bought himself another 5 minutes. The crowd was thoroughly entertained, their attention diverted from the furious venue manager, who was now aggressively tapping his foot near the exit. And so Joseph projected, raising his crystal champagne flute high into the air. Let us not focus on the stingy spreadsheets of the past. Let us focus on the abundant wealth of the future. I ask you all to raise your glasses tonight. The guests obliged, a sea of sparkling crystal lifting into the air. Chantel beamed, leaning her head against Preston's shoulder, convinced that her father had magically fixed the situation simply by being loud and charismatic. To the merger of two great dynasties, Joseph declared, his voice echoing with absolute authority. To the Washingtons and the Sterlings, may our union be prosperous, secure, and blessed beyond measure. Just as the crystal flutes began to move toward waiting lips, a loud, sharp vibration echoed from the pocket of Joseph's tuxedo jacket. It was immediately followed by a high-pitched ping emitting from Vivian's diamond-encrusted clutch. Across the room, Preston Sterling's phone chirped aggressively. He pulled it from his pocket, his eyes scanning the screen. The remaining color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly embalmed corpse. It was a synchronized wave of digital destruction rolling through the room in real time. Joseph paused, his glass hovering near his mouth. He frowned, irritated by the interruption to his perfect toast. He lowered his arm and pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He tapped the screen to read the notification. I watched his face from across the room. I watched his charismatic multi-million-dollar smile melt away. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest, his eyes widening so far I could see the whites from 30 feet away. Absolute, unadulterated terror seized his features. The crystal champagne flute slipped from my father's fingers. It hit the polished parquet floor of the Buckhead Country Club with a sharp crack that severed the tension in our immediate circle. The splash of expensive vintage champagne soaked into the cuffs of his custom-tailored trousers, but Joseph did not even flinch. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his smartphone, his pupils dilated in absolute horror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. He looked like a man who had just watched his own soul leave his body. The church accounts! Joseph finally gasped, his booming pastoral baritone reduced to a pathetic, ragged wheeze. They are frozen. All of them. The building fund. The operational reserves. The outreach accounts. Zero balances across the board. Vivian rushed to his side, her emerald silk gown rustling loudly. She grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Joseph, what are you talking about? Stop making a scene. People are staring at us. Call the bank president right now and tell him who you are. Tell him to fix this before the guests notice anything. Preston's father stepped forward. He did not look concerned. He looked vindicated. His face twisted into a smug, grotesque sneer that stripped away every ounce of his refined Southern hospitality. He looked at my father not as an equal, but as an insect he had just caught crawling across his expensive dinner table. I knew your little congregation was a scam. Joseph. He spat, his voice dropping into a harsh, ugly register. You sit up there in your designer suits preaching to your urban flock, passing around the collection plate so you can pretend to play in our league. I told Preston it was a mistake to blend our bloodline with a gospel hustle. You people always find a way to mess up the paperwork. You probably triggered a fraud alert trying to siphon your own tithes to pay for this absurdly gaudy wedding. The racial and class tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of this entire engagement finally exploded. Patricia Sterling flanked her husband, crossing her arms and looking at my mother with absolute disgust. She did not even try to hide her contempt anymore. We compromised our social standing to accommodate your family, Patricia said, her voice dripping with poison. We invited you into our club. We smiled for your tacky church photographers. And now you have the audacity to bounce payments and drag our name into whatever ghetto financial crisis you are running. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She looked completely blindsided, unable to comprehend that her desperate attempts to assimilate into high society had just been violently rejected. But Richard, she stammered, her voice shaking with humiliation, the error is not on our end. Preston's cards declined first. Our church accounts are perfectly legitimate. We have a board of directors. We have a certified public accountant. You have a glorified pyramid scheme, Preston's father snapped back. Do not dare speak to my wife in that tone. Your husband is a fraud and this entire wedding is a catastrophic mistake. They were tearing each other apart right there in the corner of the ballroom. The elite guests nearby were beginning to notice the commotion, their curious stares burning into my family's crumbling facade. Joseph was hyperventilating, furiously tapping the screen of his phone, desperately trying to log into his banking portal over and over again, as if the reality of his ruin might magically disappear. Chantel was clutching Preston's arm, whining about how everyone was ruining her rehearsal dinner and demanding that someone just pay the bill so they could cut the cake. I decided they had suffered enough in ignorance. It was time for absolute clarity. I stepped into the center of their toxic huddle holding my digital tablet. The cool, unyielding weight of the device in my hands grounded me. I looked at the Sterlings, then at my parents, absorbing the sheer panic radiating from all of them. The church accounts are not frozen because of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dad, I said. My voice was calm, cutting through their chaotic bickering with absolute precision. Joseph snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot and wild. What did you do, Kendra? Turn it back on. Turn the church money back on right now. You are destroying my life. I did not do it, Dad. You did. I tapped the screen of my tablet and held it up so the entire group could see the bright, undeniable financial flowcharts mapping their mutual destruction. The church accounts are frozen because you used the congregation's tithes as collateral to guarantee Preston's business loans. The same fraudulent business loans my forensic accounting firm just flagged for international money laundering. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute. The soft jazz music playing on the stage suddenly sounded deafening. Joseph stopped breathing. Vivian staggered back a half step, her hand flying to her mouth. Preston's father lost his smug sneer, his face going slack as the gravity of my words hit him. I swiped to the next document on my screen showing the digital signatures. 3 months ago, Preston needed a clean domestic asset portfolio to secure his latest round of offshore funding without raising red flags with federal regulators. He came to you, Dad. He promised you a seat on the Sterling Real Estate Board and access to their elite political donors in exchange for a massive quiet favor. You signed a secret guarantor agreement. You pledged the Youth Center Expansion Fund. You pledged the Global Outreach Fund. The same money you collected during your televised telethon last month, standing on stage, crying about community uplift. You leveraged millions of dollars in donations to back the debts of a white trust fund criminal just so you could secure your golden child's place in high society. Vivian turned to Joseph, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. Joseph, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not risk the church money. If the deacons find out about this, they will strip you of your ministry. You will go to prison. Joseph could not speak. He was trembling violently, his expensive suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for him. He stared at the floor, unable to meet his wife's eyes, unable to deny the indisputable truth glowing on my tablet screen. Preston's father lunged toward me, pointing a furious finger. You have no proof of this. You are a bitter, jealous woman making up stories to sabotage your sister. I will sue your firm into the ground. You cannot sue anyone from a federal holding cell, I replied smoothly, not giving him an inch of ground. The proof is already filed with the Department of Justice. When Chantel triggered the biometric alert this morning by stealing from my personal savings, the algorithms tracked her wire transfer directly into the offshore account Preston opened for her. That account was the final piece of the puzzle. It connected Preston's laundering scheme directly to the church's collateral funds. The bank automatically locked everything tied to the Sterling estate, which unfortunately includes your precious megachurch dad. Chantel let out a piercing, dramatic wail. She stomped her designer heel against the parquet floor. Stop talking about banks and federal investigations. I do not care about the youth center fund. I do not care about the church. I just want my wedding to be perfect. Someone just needs to pay the stupid venue so we can eat. She was completely detached from reality, so obsessed with her status that she could not comprehend that her fiancé and her father were both looking at decades behind bars. She grabbed Preston's lapels, shaking him. Preston, call your trust officer. Tell him to wire the money right now. I refuse to be embarrassed in front of these people. Preston shoved her hands away, looking at her with an expression of pure hatred. There is no money, Chantel. Are you deaf? Everything is gone. Before Chantel could scream again, a sharp, authoritative throat clearing interrupted our disastrous family reunion. We all turned to see the head caterer of the Buckhead Country Club, standing just a few feet away. He was flanked by the venue manager and two large security guards. The caterer was not smiling. He held a small black electronic payment terminal in his hand, and he looked incredibly impatient. "Excuse me, the head caterer," said his voice loud enough to carry over the music cutting through the thick tension of our group. He did not care about our social standing or our family drama. He only cared about his bottom line. The credit card Mr. Sterling provided just declined for the fourth time. The backup card Pastor Joseph provided has also been flagged as invalid. The caterer tapped the terminal screen, his gaze sweeping over the panicked faces of the Sterlings and my parents. "The final invoice for tonight's service is outstanding. We need $50,000 in the next 10 minutes, or my staff is packing up the food, clearing the tables, and turning off the lights in this ballroom." The rehearsal dinner ended exactly as you would expect. The caterer packed up the filet mignon, the country club manager turned off the ballroom chandeliers, and the elite guests were ushered out into the humid Atlanta night with nothing but complimentary valet validation and a lifetime of high society gossip. It was a spectacular public humiliation, but it was just the appetizer. Fast forward to 8 o'clock the next morning, the wedding day. The Atlanta Grand Estate is a sprawling multi-million-dollar property characterized by sweeping marble staircases, lush botanical gardens, and an aura of untouchable prestige. Right now, it is an active war zone. I am standing in the main grand foyer, holding a freshly brewed cup of dark roast coffee, watching the entire production bleed out before my eyes. A team of angry florists is violently stripping imported white orchids and rare hydrangeas from the massive wrought iron ceremonial arches, stuffing the expensive blooms into heavy black trash bags. Lighting technicians are ripping thick black power cables out of the wall sockets, shouting at the frantic wedding planner who is currently hyperventilating into her clipboard. The catering trucks can be heard peeling out of the gravel driveway outside. The vendors know the money is gone, and in Atlanta nobody works for exposure. I take the grand sweeping staircase up to the bridal suite. The heavy oak double doors are already flung wide open. I step inside just in time to dodge a silver-plated hairbrush flying across the room. It smashes against a full-length antique mirror, sending shards of reflective glass raining down onto the plush carpet. Chantel is pacing the floor in her custom monogrammed silk robe, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her carefully pinned bridal hair is unraveling, and her face is streaked with tears of pure, unadulterated panic. She is kicking at the discarded tissue paper from her designer shoeboxes, wailing about how her friends are already posting about the disastrous rehearsal dinner on social media, about how she is a laughingstock, about how her perfect day is ruined. Vivian is darting around the room, desperately trying to salvage the morning. She is barking orders into her cell phone to people who have clearly already stopped answering her calls. When she sees me standing in the doorway calmly sipping my coffee amidst the wreckage, her panic morphs into blind, desperate rage. She drops her phone onto a velvet ottoman and marches straight over to me. She does not ask. She does not plead. She grabs me by both shoulders, her acrylic nails biting into my skin through the fabric of my tailored blazer. She shoves a heavy leather-bound checkbook directly into my chest. "You owe us this," Vivian hisses, her face inches from mine, her eyes wide and manic. "We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We fed you. You are going to fix this right now. Write the check, Kendra, or you are no longer my daughter." I do not drop my coffee. I do not blink. I let the leather checkbook fall from my chest, hitting the carpet with a dull thud. I shrug my shoulders, forcing her hands off me. I step forward, invading her personal space, making her look me dead in the eyes. My voice is dead calm, a lethal, icy whisper that stops Chantel's screaming dead in its tracks. "You mean like how you forged my signature on federal student loans to pay for Chantel's lavish debutante ball when I was 18, I ask. Vivian swallows hard, trying to back away, but I step forward again, matching her pace, backing her toward the vanity. "Or do you mean like how Dad took the $50,000 inheritance Grandma left specifically for my graduate school tuition and secretly invested it in Preston's fake offshore startup? You let him steal my future just to buy his way into the Sterling family good graces." You treated my social security number like a blank check to fund her golden child lifestyle, while I worked 3 jobs and lived in a damp basement apartment to repair the credit you destroyed. Kendra, that was family business. Vivian stammers, her voice losing its commanding edge. We were building a legacy. You were building a fraud, I correct her sharply. You sacrificed my basic survival so Chantel could wear a tiara, and you could sit in the front pew of the church pretending to be royalty. Do not ever talk to me about what I owe you. The title of daughter was revoked the day you chose social climbing over my protection. I owe you absolutely nothing. Vivian raises her hand, a knee-jerk reaction as if she is going to slap me. I catch her wrist effortlessly in midair. I grip it just hard enough to let her know that the dynamic has permanently shifted. Do not ever raise your hand to me again, I say, dropping her arm with a look of pure disgust. Before Vivian can formulate a response, the heavy double doors of the suite fly open again. Richard and Patricia Sterling storm into the room. They look entirely disheveled, their crisp country club aesthetics completely shattered. They have clearly spent the entire night frantically calling white-collar defense lawyers who refuse to answer their calls. Patricia's face is red with fury, and Richard looks like a man standing on the gallows. Patricia points a manicured, trembling finger directly at Vivian. You people are a liability. Patricia spits her Southern Belle mask, completely incinerated, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice beneath. You dragged our son into your ghetto financial schemes. The venue manager just told us the florists are leaving because your checks bounced. You promised to cover this portion of the wedding. Vivian bristles, her pride wounded, completely ignoring the fact that her husband's megachurch accounts are frozen by the federal government. We are handling it, Patricia. It is just a banking error. A banking error, Richard Sterling shouts, his voice cracking. My entire family trust is locked down by the SEC. My son is pacing the hallway outside trying to figure out how to pay for a tank of gas, let alone a 500-person wedding. This is a disaster. You people have ruined us. Right on cue. My father pushes past the Sterlings, striding into the bridal suite. Joseph is sweating, his breathing shallow, but he is desperately trying to assert his pastoral dominance. He refuses to look weak in front of the white establishment he has worshipped his entire adult life. He adjusts his suit jacket, puffing out his chest, stepping squarely between his weeping wife and the furious Sterlings. Do not speak to my wife that way. Richard Joseph booms, projecting his voice as if he were standing at the pulpit. I am a man of God and a man of my word. I will not have my family disrespected in this venue. Joseph reaches into his breast pocket. He pulls out a sleek metal black card. It is the ultra-exclusive credit card tied directly to the church's executive operational fund. The same fund my forensic accounting algorithms locked down yesterday afternoon. He holds the useless piece of metal up in the air like it is a magic wand that can make the federal agents disappear. Swipe this, Joseph commands, looking toward the open doorway where the venue manager is hovering. Take this card downstairs right now. I will show these people exactly who we are. The venue coordinator took the heavy metal card from my father with a trembling hand. The man was just trying to do his job, caught in the crossfire of a collapsing dynasty. He slid the black card through the mobile payment terminal. The machine processed for 3 agonizing seconds before letting out a harsh, flat beep. The screen flashed bright red with a single word: declined. My father snatched the card back, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed purple. Your machine is broken, Joseph barked, his voice booming with pastoral authority. He refused to look at the Sterlings, who were watching him with identical expressions of mounting horror. Run it again. That is the church executive operational account. There is over $4 million in liquid funds attached to that card. Run it again right now. The coordinator swiped it a second time. The same harsh beep echoed through the bridal suite. Declined. Sweat began to bead on Joseph's forehead. He dug into his wallet and pulled out his personal platinum card, tossing it onto the velvet ottoman. Try that one. It is tied to my private wealth management portfolio. The coordinator picked it up, swiped it, and shook his head as the red text appeared once more. I am sorry, sir. It says contact your banking institution. The account has been frozen by federal mandate. Patricia Sterling let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. The delicate, refined Southern Belle mask she had worn for the past year completely disintegrated. She rounded on my mother, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated disgust. I knew it! Patricia spat, her voice shrill and venomous. I told Richard from the very beginning that mingling our bloodline with your kind was a catastrophic mistake. You people come from nothing, and you clearly have nothing. You masquerade around in designer gowns, paid for by the poor fools sitting in your church pews trying to pretend you belong in our world. You are nothing but common street hustlers wearing clerical collars. Vivian gasped, stepping forward as if she might physically attack the woman. How dare you speak to me that way? My husband is a pillar of this community. We are the Washingtons. You are a liability, Richard Sterling roared, stepping in front of his wife. He pointed a shaking finger at my father. You promised me those church funds were clean collateral. You swore on your so-called Holy Bible that the youth center expansion money was untethered and ready to back Preston's loans. You dragged my son into your ghetto financial crisis. My father lost his temper. The polished, charismatic preacher vanished, replaced by a desperate man backed into a corner. I dragged your son, Joseph shouted right back, stepping into Richard's personal space until they were nose to nose. Your son came to me begging for a lifeline. Your entire family fortune is a mirage built on shell companies and tax evasion. Do not stand in my daughter's bridal suite and act superior when you are about to lose your country club membership to pay for your federal defense attorneys. The illusion of their high society elite status was dead. They did not look like prominent Atlanta families anymore. They looked like brawling criminals turning on each other the second the money dried up. Preston ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive blowout. He looked from his father to my father, the reality of his complete financial ruin finally settling into his mind. He spun around and looked at Chantel. My sister was standing near the vanity, clutching her custom Vera Wang gown to her chest, as if the layers of expensive tulle could somehow protect her from the fallout. Preston, do something! Chantel whined, her voice cracking. Tell them to pay the florists. My friends are waiting downstairs. I cannot walk down a bare aisle. I am supposed to be the bride of the year. Preston stared at her with a look of absolute revulsion. He looked her up and down, taking in the diamond earrings, the elaborate makeup, the entitlement dripping from her every word. The bride of the year. Preston mocked, letting out a harsh, ugly laugh. You are nothing. You are a ghetto gold digger who just ruined my life. Did you really think I was marrying you because I loved listening to your vapid complaints about nail salons and Instagram followers? I proposed to you because I needed your father's clean church money to back my business loans. You were a prop, Chantel. A convenient, desperate prop who was stupid enough to sign whatever paper I put in front of her. Chantel stopped breathing. The pampered, spoiled golden child who had spent her entire life having her path cleared by my parents suddenly found herself standing on a landmine. Her eyes widened, welling with fresh tears, but this time they were not fake. This was not a theatrical performance to get her way. This was the raw, devastating realization that she had been used. You do not mean that, she whispered, her voice trembling. I mean every word of it, Preston snapped, taking a step toward the door. We are done. There is no wedding. There is no money. I am leaving before the federal agents show up to drag your fraudulent father out of here in handcuffs. Chantel snapped. Years of unchecked entitlement and unchecked rage boiled over in a split second. She let out a guttural, furious scream, reaching down and violently yanking the massive 5-carat engagement ring off her finger. She threw it with all her might directly at Preston's face. The heavy diamond struck him right on the cheekbone, slicing the skin before clattering onto the hardwood floor. Preston stumbled back, pressing his hand to his bleeding cheek, his eyes wide with shock. Before he could even register what had happened, Vivian charged across the room. My mother, the woman who cared more about her public image than anything else in the world, raised her hand and slapped Preston Sterling across the face with a resounding crack that echoed off the high ceilings. How dare you speak to my daughter that way? Vivian screamed, her chest heaving. You manipulative, lying sociopath, get out of this room. Preston stood there, his face bright red with the handprint blood trickling down his cheek. He opened his mouth to shout back, but I decided it was time to intervene. I was leaning comfortably against the doorframe, holding my cup of dark roast coffee, watching the entire elite facade burn to the ground. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. Careful, Preston, I said, my voice dead calm, cutting through the heavy, violent tension in the room. If you walk out that door and leave her, who is going to take the fall for the offshore accounts you opened in her name? Preston froze. He slowly turned his head toward me, the color draining from his face once again. Chantel stopped crying. She looked at me, her makeup smeared, her custom gown slipping off her shoulder. What offshore accounts? She asked, her voice shaking. I looked at my sister, feeling a brief, fleeting moment of pity before my analytical mind took over. Remember those preliminary prenuptial agreements Preston had you sign 3 months ago? The stack of papers he told you not to bother reading because his lawyers had already handled the boring details. Chantel nodded slowly, her eyes darting toward Preston. They were not just prenups, Chantel, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. Buried in that paperwork were director assignments for 3 shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. Preston made you the primary signatory. He transferred the embezzled funds into those accounts under your name to shield himself from liability. When the feds start pulling the records, they are going to see your digital signature authorizing the laundering of stolen money. He set you up to be his scapegoat. Vivian gasped, stumbling backward, until she hit the edge of the velvet chaise lounge. She looked at Preston with unadulterated horror. You framed my baby girl. You set her up to go to federal prison. I was just protecting my family assets, Preston stammered, stepping backward toward the hallway. She did not know what she was signing. She never reads anything. That is on her. Before the argument could escalate into a physical brawl, again the heavy double doors of the bridal suite were pushed wide open. The general manager of the Atlanta Grand Estate, Mr. DuPont, stepped into the room. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man who managed the most exclusive properties in the state. He was not smiling. He was flanked by 3 massive, broad-shouldered private security guards wearing dark suits and earpieces. Joseph immediately puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intercept the manager. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to summon the last remaining shreds of his pastoral authority. Listen here, Joseph barked, pointing a commanding finger at the manager. I am Pastor Joseph Washington. I demand you remove these vendors from my property immediately. You will not ruin my daughter's wedding over a simple banking delay. I will have your job for this disrespect. Mr. DuPont did not slow his pace. He did not acknowledge my father's booming voice. He did not even look at the Sterlings or my weeping mother. He walked right past Joseph as if the man were completely invisible. Mr. DuPont did not slow his pace. He did not acknowledge my father's booming voice. He did not even look at the Sterlings or my weeping mother. He walked right past Joseph as if the man were completely invisible. He navigated the chaotic wreckage of the bridal suite, stepping over discarded tissue paper and crushed flower petals until he stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He dipped his chin in a crisp, deeply respectful bow. Ms. Washington, as the majority shareholder of this hospitality group, how would you like us to deal with these trespassers? The silence that slammed into the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind that sucks all the oxygen from the air. I could hear the ragged, uneven breathing of my mother. I watched the blood drain entirely from Preston Sterling's face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. My father's jaw literally dropped. The great Pastor Joseph, a man who built an entire career on having a charismatic response for every situation, stood frozen with his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. Mr. DuPont, Joseph stammered, his booming baritone cracking into a high-pitched, nervous squeak. You are confused. This is Kendra. She is just an accountant. The bride is Chantel. I am the one who signed the contract for this venue. I am not confused, Pastor Washington. Mr. DuPont replied, his tone laced with polite corporate disdain. You signed a rental agreement. Miss Washington owns the deed. Apex Financial acquired the Atlanta Grand Estate and its parent Hospitality Group 2 years ago during a private bankruptcy auction. She is the sole proprietor of this venue and my direct employer. I handed my half-empty coffee cup to one of the massive security guards, who took it with a respectful nod. I stepped away from the doorframe and walked to the center of the room. I looked at the imported Italian marble beneath my feet, then looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. You spent the last 2 years bragging to your megachurch congregation about securing this specific venue, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the massive suite. You told everyone it was a blessing from above, that the booking committee bypassed a 3-year wait list to accommodate Chantel's spring wedding. You told your deacons it was proof of your elevated social standing. I let a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. It was not divine intervention, Dad. It was not your social standing. It was me. I approved your application. I authorized the discount you bragged about to the country club elite, while you were busy telling everyone I was a bitter single woman crunching numbers in a sad little cubicle. My cubicle job funded the very ground you are standing on. Richard Sterling stumbled backward, bumping into a velvet armchair. The arrogant old money patriarch who had just spent the last hour hurling racist insults at my family suddenly realized he was standing in a multi-million-dollar estate owned entirely by the black woman he had just threatened to destroy. His mouth opened and closed, but his legendary buckhead superiority had been completely neutralized by the undeniable reality of my net worth. He was a broke man standing in my castle. Chantel let out a strange, strangled gasp. She looked around the opulent bridal suite, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the antique mirrors, the panoramic view of the gardens outside. The venue she had tied her entire identity to, the location she had used to make her friends jealous, belonged to the sister she had treated like a doormat her entire life. She sank to the floor, her custom Vera Wang gown pooling around her in a tragic wrinkled heap. But Vivian did not collapse. My mother had spent 33 years twisting reality to fit her narrative, and her brain simply refused to process the fact that she had backed the wrong daughter. Her shock quickly mutated into a desperate, frantic sense of entitlement. She marched toward me, her eyes wide and manic, completely ignoring the 3 security guards who tensed at her sudden movement. "You own this!" Vivian demanded, her voice shrill and commanding, as if she were speaking to a disobedient child rather than the owner of the estate. "You are the majority shareholder of this entire property." I replied simply. Vivian threw her hands in the air, a wild, victorious laugh escaping her lips. "Then fix it, Kendra. Tell Mr. DuPont to bring the florists back immediately. Tell the caterers to unpack their trucks and get the food into the ovens. You are the boss. You can make them stay. We have 500 of the most important people in Atlanta arriving downstairs in less than an hour." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the bottomless depth of her delusion. She had just watched her husband face federal prison. She had just discovered her future son-in-law was a broke, embezzling criminal. She had just learned that her golden child had committed a felony by stealing my life savings. And all she cared about was making sure the wealthy guests had an aesthetically pleasing background for their social media photos. "You want me to order my staff to work a 500-person event for free?" I asked, tilting my head. "It is not for free. It is for family." Vivian snapped, her tone dripping with toxic authority. "You are going to ruin your sister's special day over a petty grudge. We are your blood. You have the power to save this wedding right now, and you are standing here playing games. Tell them to put the flowers back, Kendra." "A grudge?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You think this is a grudge, Mom? You handed Chantel the keys to my bank account. You authorized the theft of my financial security. You stood in this very room 20 minutes ago and told me I was no longer your daughter if I did not write a check to save your reputation. You sold my future to buy your way into a racist old money family that despises you. This is not a grudge. This is an eviction." Vivian opened her mouth to scream, but the fight had completely drained out of Joseph. He looked at me with hollow, defeated eyes. He finally understood that there was no charismatic speech that could save him. There was no prayer that could reverse the federal freeze on his accounts. He was a ruined man, and the daughter he had cast aside was the only one holding the keys to the kingdom. Mr. DuPont took a step forward, his posture rigid and professional. "Ms. Washington, the local authorities are on standby. Should I have security escort these individuals off the premises?" Chantel let out a fresh wail of despair from the floor. Richard Sterling glared at the door, clearly calculating how fast he could sprint to his car before the federal agents tracked him down. Vivian crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin in a final pathetic display of defiance, daring me to throw my own mother out into the street. I looked at the weeping bride. I looked at the ruined groom. I looked at the pastor who had traded his soul for a country club membership. I slowly raised my left arm and pushed back the sleeve of my blazer to check the time on my diamond watch. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in exactly 45 minutes. "Oh, I am not kicking you out," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Vivian let out a massive sigh of relief, assuming I had finally caved to the pressure of familial obligation. She reached out to fix Chantel's ruined hair. "I knew you would do the right thing, Kendra. Mr. DuPont." I continued, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Tell security to stand down. Go downstairs and instruct the ushers to open the chapel doors. Let all 500 guests in. I want the politicians, the mega church deacons, the Buckhead elite, and the media contacts. I want everyone seated." Mr. DuPont nodded his head in quiet acknowledgement, his polished leather shoes completely silent against the hardwood floor as he turned and exited the bridal suite to execute my direct orders. The heavy oak double doors clicked shut behind him, and the psychological shift in the room was immediate and profound. Vivian let out a long, ragged exhale, collapsing onto the velvet chaise lounge, as if she had just miraculously survived a devastating shipwreck. She pressed a hand to her chest, her massive diamond rings catching the overhead light. She looked at me with a sickening mixture of overwhelming relief that blood had won out over business. She genuinely believed that when faced with the ultimate choice, the quiet, obedient family scapegoat had bent the knee to protect the pristine Washington family image. Chantel did not waste a single second in reclaiming her delusional superiority. Thinking I had just caved to save our father from public humiliation, she scrambled up from the floor. She aggressively smoothed down the layers of her custom Vera Wang gown, completely ignoring the stress tears that had ruined her professionally baked makeup just moments ago. She rushed over to the vanity mirror, grabbing a silk cloth to dab at her eyes, her previous panic evaporating into an aura of pure, concentrated entitlement. She caught my reflection in the mirror as she fixed a stray curl. Her lips slowly curled into a sharp, victorious smirk. "I knew you would fall in line," Chantel said, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet poison she reserved exclusively for me. "You would not dare embarrass Dad in front of his megachurch congregation. You might own the building, Kendra, but you still know your place." I did not respond to her taunt. I simply adjusted my grip on my digital tablet and let her revel in her manufactured victory. I watched my mother quickly wipe her own face, transforming back into the untouchable First Lady of the congregation right before my eyes. Vivian clapped her hands together, ushering a still sweating, terrified Preston out of the suite, instructing him to go wash his face and stand at the altar like a wealthy man. Richard and Patricia Sterling followed their son silently, looking like condemned prisoners marching toward a firing squad. They had no choice in the matter. They had to play out the charade and pray that Joseph could somehow conjure a financial miracle before the reception began. I took my time leaving the suite, walking slowly down the grand sweeping staircase. The chapel of the Atlanta Grand Estate was an absolute masterpiece of modern luxury architecture, boasting towering vaulted ceilings, intricate stained glass windows, and row upon row of polished mahogany pews that were currently packed to maximum capacity. 500 of the most elite, influential figures in the state of Georgia were crammed into the space. I saw powerful state senators, prominent megachurch deacons, and the wealthiest old money families of Buckhead taking their seats. The air was thick with the scent of imported white roses and expensive cologne, but there was an underlying, undeniable current of heavy tension suffocating the room. High society thrives on gossip, and the ugly rumors had already breached the pristine chapel walls. As I glided down the center aisle toward my designated seat in the front row, I could hear the venomous whispers weaving through the well-dressed crowd. I heard a politician's wife murmuring behind her printed program about how Richard Sterling's exclusive black card had bounced at the country club valet the night before. I heard one of my father's senior church board members whispering about the caterers threatening to pack up their trucks in the loading dock this morning. The perfectly curated illusion of the Washington and Sterling Union was already cracking the wealthy guests circling like vultures who sensed blood in the water. I took my seat in the very front row, crossing my legs and resting my digital tablet squarely on my lap. The professional string quartet positioned near the marble altar began to play a sweeping, dramatic classical piece. The heavy wooden doors at the front of the chapel swung open, and the groom finally made his entrance. Preston stood at the altar, and he looked absolutely catastrophic. His custom-tailored tuxedo hung awkwardly on his frame, as if he had shrunk in the last 30 minutes. Sweat was visibly pouring down his forehead, soaking into his stiff white collar and ruining his expensive haircut. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting toward the side exits like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. Behind him, sitting in the first pew on the groom's side, Richard and Patricia Sterling sat rigidly upright. Patricia's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic, her knuckles bone white as she gripped her designer clutch in her lap. They knew their offshore accounts were frozen solid. They knew the federal authorities were currently circling their assets. They were only sitting there because running for the door would have triggered an immediate public arrest. The music suddenly swelled, shifting seamlessly into the traditional bridal chorus. The massive congregation rose to their feet in unison. The heavy oak doors at the very back of the chapel swung open one final time. Chantel appeared, her arm tightly looped through our father's arm. Joseph was projecting a masterful class in fake pastoral confidence. He had plastered on his famous $1 million television smile, waving his free hand generously to his wealthy congregation as they began their slow walk down the aisle. But from my vantage point in the front row, I could see the terrifying vice-like grip he had on Chantel's arm. I was practically dragging her forward to seal the deal before the feds showed up to ruin his life. He desperately needed her legally married to the Sterling name. He needed the illusion of their combined wealth to shield him from the inevitable federal audit of his church accounts. Chantel was playing her part flawlessly. She beamed at the camera flashes going off from the aisles, faking a radiant, breathless smile for her audience. She looked like the ultimate prize, the beautiful, untouched bride stepping into a perfect fairy tale life. She locked eyes with Preston as she approached the altar steps, offering him a look of absolute manufactured adoration. Preston looked right back at her with thinly veiled disgust. He knew she had blindly signed the corporate documents that framed her for his massive money laundering scheme, and she knew he was a broke criminal who had just screamed in her face and called her a gold digger. It was a match made in hell, broadcast live for 500 powerful people to witness. Joseph formally handed Chantel over to Preston. The two men did not shake hands. They barely even looked at each other as the exchange happened. Joseph immediately stepped down from the altar, taking his designated seat right next to me in the front row. I could hear his ragged, uneven breathing as he sank into the wooden pew. I could literally smell the sour scent of raw fear radiating off his expensive cologne. He leaned over, speaking out of the side of his mouth, so the important guests sitting directly behind us would not see his lips moving. "You did the right thing," Kendra Joseph whispered, his deep voice trembling with desperate, pathetic relief. "We will handle the banks first thing on Monday morning. We will fix the accounts. Just let them get through the vows today." I did not look at him. I stared straight ahead at the marble altar, my thumb resting gently against the hard edge of my tablet screen. "I did not do this for you, Dad," I whispered back, my voice barely carrying over the sound of the string quartet fading out into silence. "I did this for me." The guest pastor, a prominent megachurch bishop, Joseph, had specifically flown in from Texas to officiate the high-profile merger, stepped up to the polished wooden podium. He spread his arms wide, welcoming the elite crowd with a booming theatrical voice that commanded total attention. He spoke at great length about the sacred divine merging of two incredibly powerful dynasties. He praised the Sterling family for their historic legacy of building the city's commercial infrastructure. He praised Joseph for his spiritual leadership and dedicated community outreach. Every single word out of his mouth was a glowing testament to wealth, power, and status, a disgusting display of pure materialism dressed up in holy vestments. The bishop finally turned his attention to Chantel and Preston. He spoke eloquently about the absolute necessity of trust, about building a lifelong marital foundation on unwavering honesty and mutual respect. Preston looked like he was going to vomit right there on the pristine marble steps. Chantel simply maintained her glossy plastic smile, her eyes occasionally darting toward the back doors, likely still harboring a delusional hope that her imported orchids would magically appear to save the aesthetic of her photos. Then the bishop took a deep, dramatic breath, deliberately lowering his voice into a solemn, traditional cadence. He looked out over the vast sea of politicians, socialites, and mega-church elites, ensuring he had their undivided attention for the most critical part of the ceremony. "We are gathered here today to witness the sacred union of Preston and Chantelle." The bishop projected his voice echoing beautifully against the vaulted cathedral ceilings. "But before we proceed with the formal exchanging of vows before God and these witnesses, I must ask the congregation. If anyone here objects to this union, or knows any lawful reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The grand chapel descended into a heavy, dramatic silence. It was a tradition meant purely for theatrical effect, a mere formality that no one in modern history ever actually interrupted. The bishop smiled warmly at the couple, taking a breath to continue the ceremony. I stood up. I did not just stand up, I commanded the space. The rustle of my tailored silk suit was the only sound in the massive vaulted chapel as 500 people collectively held their breath. The guest bishop, a man accustomed to blind obedience and theatrical pauses, stared at me from the marble altar. His mouth hung slightly open, entirely unsure of how to process the sight of the bride's older sister standing rigidly in the front pew, refusing to hold her peace. Vivian immediately lunged toward me from her seat across the aisle. She grabbed a fistful of my jacket, her manicured nails digging into the fabric. "Sit down right now," she hissed, her voice a desperate guttural whisper, meant only for my ears. "I swear to God, Kendra, if you ruin this, you are dead to me." I looked down at her hand, then looked her dead in the eyes. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my jacket, letting her hand drop back to her side. "You died to me at 8 o'clock this morning, Mom," I whispered back. "Now sit down and watch the resurrection." I did not need a microphone. I did not need to shout. I simply tapped a single button on the encrypted digital tablet resting in my hand. I had ordered my lead investigator, Tasha, to bypass the venue's audiovisual system 20 minutes ago. The Atlanta Grand Estate was my property, which meant the central network architecture belonged to me. The two massive high-definition LED screens flanking the marble altar were supposed to be displaying a perfectly curated romantic slideshow of Chantelle and Preston. They were supposed to show golden hour engagement photos and childhood memories, designed to make the elite congregation weep with joy. Instead, the screens went pitch black. A collective gasp rippled through the pews as the chapel plunged into sudden dramatic shadow. Then the screens flickered to life, blazing with blinding white light that illuminated the terrified faces of the wedding party. The payload dropped. Instead of baby pictures, the massive screens flashed high-resolution, unredacted federal banking statements. The text was enlarged, highlighted in aggressive yellow marker for maximum visibility from the very back row. A wave of confused murmurs washed over the politicians, the megachurch elite, and the wealthy buckhead socialites. I swiped my finger across my tablet, bringing the first piece of evidence into brutal, undeniable focus. It was the wire transfer confirmation from this morning. $150,000 routed directly from my personal savings account to the offshore shell company Preston had opened in Chantelle's name. I had placed Chantelle's forged digital signature side by side with my actual registered biometric key. Underneath that, the screen displayed the IP address of the device that authorized the transfer. It traced directly back to the IP address of the bridal suite they were standing in just an hour ago. "I object," I said. My voice was clear, perfectly modulated, and it echoed off the stained glass windows and vaulted ceilings like a crack of thunder. Chantelle let out a horrified shriek. The massive bouquet of imported white orchids slipped from her trembling hands and hit the marble floor. She stared at the 50-foot screen displaying her felony fraud to everyone she had ever tried to impress. "I object," I repeated, stepping out of the pew and into the center aisle, "because the bride is a thief." Preston lunged forward, his face flushed an ugly dark crimson. "Cut the power! Cut the screens right now!" he screamed at the audiovisual technicians stationed in the balcony. He was sweating profusely, his custom tuxedo clinging to his back. "Turn it off. This is a lie. This is slander." The technicians did not move. They worked for me. I swiped my tablet a second time. The screens behind the altar shifted instantly. The forged wire transfer disappeared, replaced by a complex damning web of offshore financial flowcharts. The documents bore the official seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission, a watermark that made the politicians in the third row physically recoil in their seats. The charts meticulously detailed Preston Sterling's embezzlement network. They showed the exact dates and dollar amounts he had siphoned from domestic charities and funneled into Cayman Island shell corporations. "The groom is facing federal indictment," I announced, projecting my voice so the back row could hear every single syllable clearly. I looked directly at Preston's parents, Richard and Patricia Sterling, who were currently shrinking into the mahogany pews. Patricia was frantically fanning herself with a ceremony program, looking like she might pass out. Richard was furiously dialing a number on his cell phone, realizing completely that his dynasty was being dismantled in front of the entire city. The congregation erupted into chaos. High society decorum completely evaporated. I could hear State Senator Davis whispering furiously to his security detail. I could see the prominent church mothers clutching their pearls and fanning themselves. But the final blow had not even landed yet. I turned my gaze to the altar, looking directly at my father. Joseph was gripping the wooden podium so tightly his knuckles were bone white. I was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over again, silently begging me to spare his reputation. He cared more about the opinions of the megachurch deacons sitting in the first 5 rows than he cared about the daughter standing right in front of him. I did not hesitate. I swiped my tablet for the third and final time. The offshore accounts vanished from the massive screens. In their place appeared the most sacred, heavily guarded documents in my father's possession. It was the confidential loan guarantor agreement between Joseph Washington and Richard Sterling. The screen clearly displayed the exact source of the collateral my father had pledged to back Preston's fraudulent business ventures. I highlighted the account names in bright glowing red: the Youth Center Expansion Fund, the Global Outreach Ministry Reserve, the Widows and Orphans Tithe Account. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Deacon Miller, a man who had served on the church board for 20 years and had personally championed the youth center donations, literally jumped to his feet. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, then pointed it directly at my father. Joseph Deacon Miller roared, his voice carrying over the rising panic in the chapel. "Tell me that is a lie. Tell me you did not gamble the community's money to pay for this sham of a wedding." Joseph opened his mouth, his charismatic preacher persona completely shattered. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, but he had no words. He had no sermon to save him from the forensic math displayed behind his head. The numbers did not lie, and the numbers proved he was a predator dressed in holy vestments. "And this entire wedding is a crime scene," I concluded, my voice slicing through the escalating shouting matches breaking out across the pews. Vivian jumped up from her seat and charged at me. She raised her hand, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, ready to strike me right there in the center aisle. She did not make it halfway. My lead investigator, Tasha, who had been sitting quietly 3 rows back, posing as a guest, stepped smoothly into the aisle. She caught Vivian's wrist, effortlessly twisting it just enough to stop the momentum without causing injury. Tasha leaned in, her voice deadly quiet. "I strongly suggest you take a seat, ma'am. You have caused enough damage for one lifetime." Chantel collapsed onto the altar steps, weeping hysterically, her designer makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. She was clutching her veil, screaming at Preston to do something, to call his lawyers to fix it. But Preston was already backing away from her, edging toward the side exit of the chapel, like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. He had completely abandoned the woman he swore to protect just moments ago. The guest bishop had stepped entirely off the altar, distancing himself from my family as quickly as humanly possible. The politicians were actively fleeing the chapel, desperate to avoid being photographed at an event that was clearly about to become a federal crime scene. I stood perfectly still in the eye of the storm. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt the profound, crystal-clear peace of absolute justice. I watched the empire of lies my parents had built burn to the ground, fueled by their own greed and accelerated by the truth they had tried so hard to hide. Then a sound cut through the screaming, the weeping, and the frantic murmurs. It was a loud, heavy, synchronized booming sound echoing from the very back of the chapel. The massive oak double doors at the entrance swung open with such force they hit the stone walls with a deafening crack. The bright afternoon sunlight flooded into the vestibule, casting long, imposing shadows down the center aisle. The congregation fell instantly silent. Everyone turned their heads toward the back of the room, expecting to see late-arriving guests, or perhaps the venue security team coming to restore order. It was not late-arriving guests. The heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel did not just open. They collided with the stone walls with a concussive boom that shook the floorboards beneath my feet. The brilliant afternoon sunlight spilled into the vestibule, but the figures stepping into the light were not late-arriving guests. It was a perfectly synchronized wall of dark windbreakers, tactical vests, and gold badges catching the glare of the stained glass windows. Federal agents and local Atlanta police marched down the center aisle in a tight, unyielding formation. They moved with a cold, terrifying precision that completely shattered the delicate floral illusion of the high society wedding. The professional string quartet abruptly stopped playing mid-note, a harsh squeak of a violin string ringing out like a warning siren through the vaulted space. The congregation erupted. The low, confused murmurs instantly escalated into high-pitched screams and panicked shouts. The elite guests, the prominent politicians, and the megachurch deacons, who had spent the last hour judging my family from their polished mahogany pews, suddenly scrambled like terrified animals. Silk dresses tore against armrests. Designer heels twisted on the marble floors as people pushed and shoved each other trying to reach the side exits. No one wanted their face captured on camera near a federal raid. I remained perfectly still, sitting in the front row, watching the tactical procession march past me. I could feel the cold rush of air trailing behind the agents as they bypassed the frantic guests and made a direct, unwavering line for the marble altar. My father Joseph had physically backed himself into the carved wooden podium. His hands were raised in the air, as if he were trying to surrender to a higher power, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his public destruction. My mother. Vivian was frozen on her knees in the aisle, her mouth open in a silent scream, unable to comprehend that the social elevation she craved had just become a spectacular prison sentence. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from absolute authority, did not even glance at my parents. He walked straight up the altar steps, his heavy boots echoing loudly against the marble. Preston Sterling took one look at the federal badges and completely broke. The arrogant, untouchable heir to Buckhead old money let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. He turned on his heel desperately, trying to scramble up the altar steps toward the choir loft, willing to trample his own bride to escape. Two agents flanked him before he made it 3 feet. They grabbed his arms, spinning him around and violently slamming him face first against the polished wooden altar rail. Preston Sterling, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming with absolute terrifying clarity over the screams of the crowd. "You are under arrest for federal embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Preston was sobbing, actual tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive haircut. He thrashed weakly against the agents, begging and pleading in front of the entire congregation. "Do not do this to me. I did not do it. It was my father. He made me set up the accounts. Ask Chantel. She signed the papers. She is the director of the shell companies. Arrest her." I was selling out his bride and his own flesh and blood without a single second of hesitation. He stripped away every ounce of his refined Southern gentleman facade, revealing the cowardly thief underneath. Chantel backed away in absolute horror. She gripped the layers of her massive custom Vera Wang gown, stumbling backward over the heavy imported tulle. She shook her head frantically, her elaborate bridal hair unraveling completely, her designer makeup smeared across her face in dark, ugly streaks. "No!" Chantel shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. "No, I am the bride. You cannot arrest me on my wedding day. I do not know anything about offshore accounts. Daddy, do something. Tell them who you are. Tell them to stop." Joseph could not speak. He could not even meet her eyes. He just stared at the floor, watching his empire burn. A female federal agent stepped forward, her expression completely devoid of sympathy. She reached out and grabbed Chantel by the wrist, forcefully pulling the sobbing bride away from the podium. "Chantel Washington, you are under arrest for identity theft and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Chantel thrashed, kicking her expensive heels against the marble floor, but the agent was relentless. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly over Chantel's manicured wrists, binding her hands securely behind her back. The stark contrast of the dark metal against the delicate white lace of her bridal gown was a masterpiece of poetic justice. She had traded her integrity for the illusion of wealth. She had stolen my life savings to buy her way into this lifestyle, and now she was wearing the only jewelry she actually earned. Patricia Sterling let out a blood-curdling scream from the front pew. She tried to rush the altar to save her son, but a local police officer blocked her path, holding up a stern hand that forced her back into her seat. Richard Sterling, however, had simply had enough. The patriarch of the Sterling dynasty, a man who had spent his entire life believing his bank account made him immune to the laws of physics, marched straight up to the altar. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated white privilege and blinding rage. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at the face of the lead FBI agent. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" Richard roared, his voice thick with a lifetime of unchecked authority. "Release my son right this instant. This is a private event. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here. Do you have any idea who I am? I play golf with the governor. I fund the police pension program. I will have your badge for this. I will have your entire department dismantled by tomorrow morning." The lead agent did not flinch. He did not step back. He slowly turned his head to look at Richard Sterling, his expression entirely deadpan, unimpressed by the frantic barking of a cornered criminal. He looked at Richard not as a powerful billionaire, but as just another target on a long list of federal indictments. The agent reached into the inner pocket of his tactical vest and pulled out a neatly folded piece of official federal stationery. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Sterling." The agent said, his voice dropping into a low, lethal register that carried perfectly through the silent chapel. "And we do not care about your golf partners. We have a federal warrant for your arrest as well. Your entire network of offshore shell companies was exposed to the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning." Richard Sterling froze. The furious, self-righteous color drained instantly from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His arm slowly dropped to his side. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was a man who believed the world was a chessboard designed exclusively for him to win, but the game was over. He was not going to make a phone call to fix this. He was not going to buy his way out. The invincible Sterling empire had been completely obliterated. Two more agents stepped forward, grabbing Richard by the arms and twisting them behind his back. The sharp, definitive click of the handcuffs echoed through the chapel, sealing the fate of the arrogant patriarch. As the agents secured his wrists, Richard Sterling slowly turned his head. His wide, terrified eyes scanned the front row until they locked directly onto me. He knew. He looked at my tailored silk suit, my calm demeanor, and the encrypted digital tablet resting casually in my hands. He remembered how he had spoken to me just hours ago, treating my family like garbage he could step on. He realized in that exact moment that the black woman he had belittled, insulted, and tried to destroy was the architect of his absolute ruin. I did not break eye contact. I did not gloat or scream. I simply raised my hand and gave Richard Sterling a slow, deliberate, mocking wave goodbye. The female federal agent did not care about the custom Vera Wang gown. She did not care about the delicate imported lace or the hand-stitched crystal beading. She practically dragged my sister down the pristine marble aisle of the chapel. The sound of Chantel's expensive tool catching and tearing on the sharp edges of the wooden pews echoed loudly through the silent, terrified congregation. Chantel was thrashing wildly, her diamond earrings swinging, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure desperation. She dragged her heels against the polished stone, forcing the agent to pull harder, making a complete and utter spectacle of herself in front of the very high society crowd she had spent the last 2 years trying to impress. "Kendra, do something!" Chantel shrieked. Her voice cracked, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the cathedral. She spotted me standing perfectly still in the front row, holding my encrypted tablet tightly against my chest. The delusion in her eyes was staggering. Even now, wearing heavy federal handcuffs, she honestly believed I existed solely to be her financial safety net. "Pay them off. You have the money. Just write them a check and make them let me go right now. I am supposed to be leaving for my honeymoon in the Maldives tonight. I took a slow, deliberate step out of the pew and directly into the center aisle. I planted my feet squarely on the marble floor, physically blocking the federal agent and my sister from taking another step toward the exit. The agent paused, giving me a hard, assessing look, but she did not push me aside. She let me have my moment. I looked down at Chantel. I looked at the smeared designer makeup, the ruined bridal hair, the absolute panic radiating from her sweat-soaked skin. This was the golden child. This was the woman who had never faced a single consequence in her entire 28 years of life. I told you, Chantel. I kept my voice incredibly calm and flat, ensuring every single elite guest in the first 10 rows could hear my exact words. The feds do not take cash. Enjoy your honeymoon in holding. Chantel let out a guttural, feral scream. It was a sound stripped of all her refined Southern belle training. She lunged forward, trying to physically strike me with her shoulder, since her hands were bound tightly behind her back. You did this to me. She spat tears flying from her face and landing on my shoes. You set me up because you are a bitter, lonely, jealous spinster. You have always hated me because Mom and Dad loved me more. You ruined my life. You ruined your own life the second you decided my bank account was your personal wedding registry, I replied, not moving a single inch. You forged my signature because Mom and Dad taught you that my assets belonged to you. They taught you that there were no consequences for taking what was mine. But the federal government does not care who the golden child is, Chantel. The fraud algorithms do not care that you were prom queen. They only care about wire fraud, and your digital signature is stamped on every single fraudulent offshore document Preston put in front of you. The federal agent grabbed Chantel by the bicep, yanking her forward to resume the march toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel. Chantel continued to scream my name, begging and cursing me in the same breath, until her voice was muffled by the thick wooden doors closing shut behind her. A loud, agonizing wail tore through the front of the chapel. It was not Chantel. It was Vivian. My mother threw herself out of the front pew and collapsed onto her knees right in the middle of the center aisle. It was a theatrical, devastating breakdown, the kind of performance she usually reserved for the front row of my father's megachurch when the television cameras were rolling during a televised revival service. But this was real, unadulterated panic. Vivian crawled forward on the hard marble floor, her expensive emerald silk gown twisting uncomfortably around her legs. She lunged and grabbed a handful of my tailored trousers. Her acrylic nails dug fiercely through the silk blend fabric, scratching the skin of my shin. Her face was a horrific mess of running mascara and twisted venomous rage. "You are a monster!" Vivian screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice shredding my eardrums. She shook my leg violently, trying to pull me down to the floor with her. "You planned this entire thing. You sat there and watched us plan this wedding knowing you were going to destroy us. You destroyed your own blood. You are sending your own sister to a federal prison. I curse the day you were born. You are a wicked, spiteful demon." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the woman who had routinely sacrificed my mental health, my financial stability, and my basic dignity just to buy her younger daughter a better seat at the country club. She was not grieving for my well-being. She was grieving for the loss of her social status. She was furious because she was about to be humiliated in front of the buckhead elite she so desperately worshipped. She was angry because the illusion of the flawless Washington family had been publicly shattered. "You think I am a monster because I refuse to be your victim anymore," I said, looking down at her trembling form. "You let Dad drain my college funds. You destroyed my credit before I was even old enough to vote. You stood in the bridal suite this morning and demanded I pay for a party celebrating the man who was actively laundering money through your husband's church. You did not want a daughter, Mom. You wanted an ATM." Vivian sobbed louder, resting her forehead against my knee, gripping my trousers so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Fix it, Kendra. Please fix it. Call the banks. Call your firm. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We will give you the money back. We will do whatever you want. Do not let them take my baby girl away. Do not let them take the church." I reached down and gripped my mother's wrist. I dug my fingers into her pulse point and forcefully pried her hand off my clothing. She resisted at first, but I did not let go until her acrylic nails popped off the fabric. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my trousers, stepping back to put a physical boundary between us. I looked down at her with absolute glacial detachment. "I did not forge the signatures, Mom," I said. My voice was steady, ringing with an undeniable truth that made the surrounding church deacons exchange horrified, panicked glances. I did not force Chantel to steal $150,000 from me. I did not force Dad to leverage the youth center funds to back a criminal enterprise. I just stopped covering it up. I stopped being the shield you use to protect yourselves from the consequences of your own greed. The sharp, aggressive sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind me. Joseph Washington had finally snapped out of his paralyzed state of shock. He saw his wealthy congregation filming his wife weeping on the floor. He saw the remaining federal agents securing the perimeter of his venue. He saw his entire empire, his multi-million-dollar church, his reputation, and his freedom burning to the ground in real time. And he saw me standing in the center of the wreckage holding the match. The polished, charismatic pastor was completely gone. His face was contorted into a mask of pure, violent rage. The veins in his neck were bulging aggressively against his clerical collar. He marched toward me with heavy, punishing strides, closing the distance between us in seconds. He raised his large hand high into the air, fully intending to strike me down, right there in the middle of the holy sanctuary. Joseph's hand sliced through the air with terrifying speed. He aimed right for my face, a violent, desperate reflex from a man who had lost all control. Before his palm could even graze my cheek, a hand clamped onto his wrist like a steel vise. Tasha, my lead investigator, and highly trained personal security, stepped smoothly from the periphery. She twisted his arm backward just enough to neutralize his leverage, locking his entire body into a rigid, painful submission. "I would not do that," Pastor Tasha said. Her voice was a low, dangerous hum that carried a lethal promise. Joseph gasped, his eyes wide with shock and sudden pain. He snatched his arm back the second Tasha released the pressure, stumbling backward against the carved wooden podium. His chest heaved violently under his tailored tuxedo. The mask of the holy man, the untouchable spiritual leader of Atlanta, was completely gone. In its place stood a terrified, cornered fraud. "You have ruined my ministry," Joseph roared. His voice cracked, losing its trademark polished baritone. Spittle flew from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You have destroyed everything I built with my bare hands. The church accounts are frozen. The sterling money is gone. My reputation is in shreds. Where are we supposed to live, Kendra? Our accounts are locked. We cannot even buy a tank of gas. How are we supposed to survive this?" I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my expression devoid of a single ounce of sympathy. "You built your ministry on a foundation of theft." "Dad," I replied, my voice echoing clearly over the horrified murmurs of the stunned crowd. "You survived by using my social security number to open credit cards when I was a teenager. You survived by taking out fraudulent loans and siphoning money from the very people who trusted you to pray for them. You thought you could just keep moving the shell game forward, but you ran out of pieces to play." "You ungrateful wretch," Joseph shouted, gripping the edges of the podium to keep himself upright. "I put clothes on your back. I put food in your mouth. You owe me your absolute loyalty. You fed me scraps while you bought Chantel designer handbags with money you stole from the offering plate." I shot back, shutting down his pathetic attempt at parental guilt. "You demanded loyalty, but you only rewarded blind obedience. You bet everything on the golden child, and she led you straight into a federal indictment." I reached into my structured leather tote bag. My movements were deliberate, unhurried, and calculated to maximize the agonizing tension in the room. I pulled out a crisp, bright white envelope. It was thick with heavy stock paper, the kind of paper that delivers life-altering news. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and pressed the envelope flat against the center of his chest. He reflexively brought his hands up to hold it, his fingers trembling so violently the paper rattled. "You should start packing, Dad," I said, looking him dead in the eye. Vivian, who was still weeping on the cold marble floor, snapped her head up. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, ruining her flawless makeup. "Packing?" Vivian choked out her voice, a ragged, desperate rasp. "What do you mean, packing?" I kept my gaze locked on my father, watching the last remaining drops of blood drain from his face. You did not just use the church tithes to back Preston's fraudulent business loans, Dad. You got greedy. You wanted a larger, more prestigious stake in the sterling real estate portfolio, so you used the family home as secondary collateral. The sprawling six-bedroom suburban mansion you brag about every Sunday. The house you host your exclusive garden parties in. You signed the deed over to back a criminal enterprise because you wanted to play in the big leagues. Vivian let out a sharp, breathless gasp that sounded like she was physically suffocating. Joseph, tell me she is lying, Vivian shrieked, crawling forward on her knees and grabbing the hem of his trousers. Tell me you did not mortgage the house. Tell me we still have our home. Joseph could not look at her. He could not look at anyone. He stared down at the crisp white envelope in his shaking hands. "I'm mortgaged it months ago, Mom," I answered for him, my voice completely devoid of mercy. But the bank called the loan the exact second the federal algorithms flagged the offshore accounts this morning. The bank foreclosed at 9 o'clock today. And since my financial firm specializes in distressed assets and high-value liquidations, we just bought that specific debt portfolio outright. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to ensure the absolute finality of my words pierced straight through his massive ego. So consider this your formal 24-hour eviction notice. Joseph ripped open the envelope. His bloodshot, frantic eyes scanned the heavy stock paper. The official embossed seal of foreclosure was stamped right at the top, along with the undeniable signature of a federal judge authorizing the immediate seizure of the property. He read the financial details. He saw the exact dollar amount of his crushing, inescapable debt. And then he read the name of the new property owner listed at the very bottom of the document: Apex Financial Forensics. My company. I now owned the roof over his head, and I was actively tearing it down. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering through the air before landing silently on the marble floor. Vivian saw the foreclosure seal. The reality of her sudden, devastating poverty hit her like a physical blow. She turned on her husband instantly, her grief morphing into vicious, targeted rage. She began hitting his legs, smacking his knees with her open palms. "You fool!" Vivian wailed, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast cathedral. "You told me the house was secure. You promised me the estate was fully paid off. I am the first lady of this church. I cannot be homeless. I cannot live in the streets. You promised me we were going to be untouchable." Joseph's knees buckled under the weight of his wife's attacks and his total ruin. The grand, untouchable patriarch collapsed, dropping to the cold floor right next to Vivian. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing sound that was completely devoid of his usual arrogance. He was a broken, ruined man, stripped of his wealth, his home, and his dignity in a matter of minutes. The illusion of their powerful, unified marriage dissolved into a screaming match on the floor of the sanctuary, exposing the shallow, transactional nature of their entire bond. I looked up and scanned the front pews. The elite congregation, the powerful local politicians, the wealthy megachurch deacons, they were not intervening. They were not rushing forward to comfort their fallen pastor or his weeping wife. They had completely turned on him. Instead of offering grace or assistance, they were holding up their smartphones. I saw Deacon Miller, a man who had trusted my father with millions in community funds, holding his phone perfectly steady, recording the humiliation with a look of absolute disgust. I saw a prominent city councilwoman whispering rapidly into her smartwatch, already distancing herself from the political fallout. The bright red recording lights blinked continuously in the dim light of the chapel. Every single angle of my parents' misery was being documented. They were live streaming the catastrophic collapse of the Washington dynasty to the entire city of Atlanta. The very same high society crowd my parents had sacrificed my future to impress was now eagerly broadcasting their absolute destruction, ensuring they would never be able to show their faces in polite society ever again. I do not stay to watch them weep. I do not linger to savor the sound of my mother wailing on the cold marble floor, or the sight of my father staring blankly at his own eviction notice. For 33 years I was conditioned to fix their messes, to soothe their bruised egos, and to absorb their collateral damage. I was taught that my only value in this family was to be the quiet, invisible safety net they could deploy whenever their reckless ambition outpaced their actual talent. Not anymore. I turn my back on the altar of their ruin and begin my descent down the center aisle. The elite congregation parts for me like the Red Sea. These are the same politicians, megachurch deacons, and high society socialites who refused to look me in the eye just an hour ago. Now they shrink back against the mahogany pews, pulling their expensive silk dresses and tailored suit jackets out of my path as if I am actively on fire. No one speaks. No one dares to utter a single syllable of condemnation or defense. They just watch the woman they dismissed as a low-level cubicle worker completely dismantle two prominent Atlanta dynasties in under 10 minutes. I pass the third row, where the senior church mothers are sitting. These women have spent decades gossiping about my single status, whispering behind their church fans about how I was a disappointment compared to the vibrant, beautiful Chantel. Sister Beatrice, a woman wearing an elaborate lavender hat, catches my eye. Her mouth is hanging open, her hands trembling as she clutches her designer purse. She tries to say something, perhaps to quote a scripture about forgiveness or family duty, but the words die in her throat the moment I hold her gaze. I do not give her a smile. I do not give her the comfort of my submission. I simply keep walking, the sharp click of my stilettos against the marble echoing like a gavel striking a judge's block. I feel the weight of 1,000 expectations sliding off my shoulders with every step I take toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel. The air in the cathedral smells of wilted imported orchids, spilled champagne, and expensive panic. For decades, my mother treated me as an embarrassing afterthought, a financial workhorse meant to fund the extravagant lifestyle she believed she inherently deserved. My father used his pulpit to preach about integrity, while secretly mortgaging the faith of his congregation to buy his way into a racist, exclusionary social circle. And Chantel, the golden child, simply took whatever she wanted, assuming the world would always bend to her vanity. Now the world has snapped back. I glance to my left and see Patricia Sterling hyperventilating against a stained glass window, her pastel pink Chanel suit crumpled and ruined. Two female federal agents are aggressively patting her down, searching her designer clutch for hidden assets. Richard Sterling is already being shoved into the back of a tactical vehicle outside the side entrance, his head pushed down roughly by a local police officer. The invincible Buckhead dynasty has been reduced to common criminals in handcuffs, entirely stripped of their arrogant privilege. Behind me, the federal agents are marching Preston and Chantel out through the side exits. The sharp metallic clinking of their handcuffs is the only music playing at this wedding. I reach the back of the sanctuary without looking over my shoulder a single time. I place my hands on the brass handles of the massive cathedral doors and push them open, stepping out of the stifling darkness of my past and into the blinding Georgia sunlight. The scene outside the Atlanta Grand Estate is pure, unfiltered chaos. The pristine, manicured lawns are completely overrun. Local news crews, financial beat reporters, and investigative journalists have already swarmed the front steps, having been tipped off by the massive, highly coordinated deployment of federal tactical vehicles. News helicopters are hovering loudly overhead, the rhythmic chopping of their blades casting large, sweeping shadows over the luxury cars parked in the circular driveway. The flashbulbs create a strobing, blinding effect that makes the portico look like a red carpet premiere turned crime scene. The second I step out onto the shaded portico, a sea of flashing camera bulbs blinds me. The journalists are absolutely rabid. They have spent the last 6 months documenting Pastor Joseph's rapid rise into the political elite, chronicling Chantel's lavish wedding preparations in the local society pages. Now they are witnessing the spectacular implosion of that exact narrative. A dozen microphones bearing the bold logos of every major news network in the state are thrust directly into my face. The reporters are shouting over each other, their voices blending into a frantic, desperate cacophony. They want the scoop. They want to understand how the most anticipated high society wedding of the year morphed into the largest white-collar crime bust of the decade. A female reporter from a national financial network shoves her microphone forward, nearly tripping over a cable. Ms. Washington, she asks breathlessly. What happens to the Atlanta Grand Estate now? What happens to the millions of dollars stolen from the church congregation? A tall reporter from the local investigative desk pushes his way to the very front of the pack, shoving a digital recorder dangerously close to my chest. Ms. Washington, he shouts, his voice cutting through the absolute frenzy. Did you orchestrate the arrest of your own sister? Did you intentionally sabotage your father to seize control of his real estate assets? Is it true the Sterling family is completely bankrupt? I stop at the very top of the cathedral steps. I hold my hand up, a simple commanding gesture that instantly quiets the immediate front row of the press pool. I look out over the sea of hungry journalists. I take a slow, measured breath, letting the crisp afternoon air fill my lungs. I do not look flustered. I do not look like an angry, vindictive sibling throwing a public tantrum. I look exactly like what I am. I am a senior partner at an elite financial forensics firm who just successfully closed her biggest case to date. I square my shoulders and look directly into the primary camera lens, ensuring my posture is completely flawless. I am a forensic accountant, I state clearly. My voice projects with absolute unshakable authority, carrying easily over the aggressive hum of the news helicopters. My job is to expose fraud no matter who commits it and no matter where the money tries to hide. I do not orchestrate arrests. I simply follow the paper trail. The math does not lie, and unlike some people in this city, it does not play favorites. The reporters fall completely silent for a fraction of a second. They are furiously scribbling my words onto their notepads and typing them into their phones. It is the perfect soundbite. It is cold, it is calculated, and it is completely legally bulletproof. I do not wait for their follow-up questions. I do not owe the media any further explanation of my family trauma. I have given them the headline they came for, and my involvement in this public spectacle is officially over. Tasha flanks my right side, using her tactical security training to create a solid physical barrier between me and the encroaching cameras. At the exact bottom of the stone steps, a sleek midnight black Maybach pulls up smoothly to the curb, completely bypassing the chaotic line of panicked guests waiting for the valet. The general manager of the estate, Mr. DuPont, is waiting by the rear passenger side. He stands perfectly straight, ignoring the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters with practiced upscale indifference. Mr. DuPont reaches out and pulls open the heavy reinforced door of the Maybach for me. He offers a brief, deeply respectful nod. Right this way, Miss Washington. I step inside the cool, quiet leather interior of the luxury vehicle. The contrast is instantaneous. The soft ambient floor lighting and the rich smell of premium leather envelop me like a protective shield. As Mr. DuPont shuts the heavy door behind me, the deafening noise of the aggressive press, the flashing cameras, and the distant muffled screams of my mother completely vanish. The tinted glass rolls up silently, sealing me inside my mobile fortress. I sink back into the plush leather seat, completely untouched, and watch the ruins of their empire fade away in the rearview mirror. 3 months later. The Atlanta skyline stretches out in front of me, a sprawling, glittering tapestry of glass and steel catching the early morning sunlight. The chaotic traffic of the city hums far below, completely muted by the sheer height of my building. I am sitting on the expansive wraparound balcony of my Buckhead penthouse, wrapped in a plush silk robe that costs more than my first car. The air up here is crisp, clean, and beautifully quiet. There are no frantic phone calls demanding my credit card numbers. There are no backhanded compliments about my marital status, whispered loudly across a crowded dining room. There are no demands to shrink myself so someone else can shine. There is just the soft clinking of ice against crystal as I take a slow, deliberate sip of a perfectly chilled mimosa. It tastes like absolute, uninterrupted peace. A sharp, distinct chime from my encrypted digital tablet breaks the comfortable silence. I set my crystal glass down on the smooth glass patio table and pick up the device. A breaking news alert from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution flashes across the high-definition screen. The headline is bold, unforgiving, and completely public. Sterling real estate heirs accept federal plea deals. I tap the article, casually skimming the extensive details I already helped the federal prosecutors finalize weeks ago. Richard and Preston Sterling folded entirely. Faced with the insurmountable mountain of forensic evidence my firm provided to the Department of Justice, they did not even try to mount a defense. Their high-priced, aggressive white-collar lawyers took one look at the digital paper trail and advised them to take the plea. 10 years in a federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud, embezzlement, and international money laundering. Preston traded his tailored country club tuxedos for a standard-issue jumpsuit. The old money arrogance that led him to believe he could exploit black wealth and walk away clean has been permanently extinguished behind bars. And then there is my sister. I scroll down to the secondary headline detailing the CEO conspirators. Chantel Washington is officially a convicted felon. She is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility for identity theft and wire fraud. The federal judge did not care about her imported orchids. The prosecutor did not care that she was the beloved golden child of a prominent Southern pastor. When the heavy wooden gavel came down in that courtroom, her flawless, pampered facade shattered completely. I heard from a mutual contact that Chantel cried hysterically during her sentencing, begging the judge for a suspended sentence, playing the victim, and claiming she was manipulated by a powerful man. But the digital footprint does not lie. She forged my biometric signature. She moved the stolen money. She wanted the billionaire lifestyle so desperately that she sold her own soul and her own sister to get it. Her elite social status has been permanently revoked by a felony record. She will never sit at a high society gala again. She will spend the rest of her life explaining a federal conviction to every employer she ever meets. As for my parents, their spectacular fall from grace was swift, brutal, and absolute. The board of deacons at Joseph's megachurch did not hesitate for a single second. The morning after the federal raid at the wedding, they held an emergency executive meeting. When they saw the unredacted financial reports showing exactly how my father gambled their sacred tithes on a fraudulent tech startup, they ousted him immediately. They stripped him of his pastoral title, revoked his generous church pension, and publicly denounced him to the entire congregation during Sunday service. The man who spent 30 years building an empire of spiritual superiority was thrown out the back door of his own sanctuary. The prosperity gospel he preached so loudly failed to save him when the math caught up to his lies. Vivian fell right alongside him, dragged down by the very same social anchors she used to drown me. The prominent society women who used to kiss her cheek at exclusive charity luncheons blocked her number the very next day. They treated her like a highly contagious disease. Without the church funds to subsidize their extravagant lifestyle, and with their sprawling suburban mansion legally seized and liquidated by my asset management firm, they were completely destitute. They currently rent a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment in a forgotten suburb on the outskirts of the city. There are no crystal chandeliers. There are no domestic workers. There are no designer gowns. There is just thin walls, cheap linoleum floors, and the crushing, inescapable reality of their own actions. They tried calling me once, just one single time about a month ago. The voicemail was a pathetic weeping mixture of Vivian begging for financial forgiveness and Joseph demanding I honor my biblical duty to honor my mother and father. He had the absolute audacity to quote scripture to the woman whose life savings he actively tried to sacrifice. I did not respond. I did not call them back. I simply contacted my service provider and changed my phone number. The silence that followed was the greatest gift I have ever given myself. They are locked in a prison of their own making, and I threw away the key. The heavy glass balcony door slides open behind me, the smooth metal track gliding silently. Tasha steps out into the morning sun. She is wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit, looking every bit the lethal, highly trained investigator she is. She walks over to my patio table and drops a thick, red classified financial dossier right next to my mimosa glass. Another billionaire trying to hide his assets, boss, Tasha says, her voice carrying a hint of a predatory smile. He is running a sophisticated shell game through real estate holdings in Dubai, but he left a digital trail a mile wide. The federal prosecutors want us to map the network and hand them the ignition key. I look down at the heavy red folder. It is packed with hidden accounts, forged documents, and the desperate lies of powerful people who think their money makes them invisible to the law. I pick up the dossier, feeling the satisfying weight of raw information in my hands. As I lift it, the bright morning sun catches the massive, flawless diamond tennis bracelet resting on my wrist. The light refracts, sending a brilliant, blinding spectrum of colors dancing across the cover of the file. I smile, leaning back in my chair. For 33 years, I was the designated family scapegoat. I was the quiet, overlooked disappointment, whose only supposed purpose was to fund their grand illusions of superiority. They thought I was weak because I chose to sit in a cubicle instead of standing on a stage. They thought I was foolish because I valued hard work over loud, empty bragging. They severely underestimated the quiet girl in the corner, but they forgot one crucial, undeniable rule about the person who quietly handles the money. I know exactly where every single penny goes, and I know exactly how to take it all away. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true security comes from establishing unwavering boundaries, not from sacrificing yourself to appease toxic family members. For years, I allowed my family to exploit my financial and emotional resources because I believed blood meant unconditional loyalty. However, loyalty should never require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Reclaiming your power means recognizing that your worth is not defined by those who use you. Sometimes, the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who refuse to respect you and letting them face the natural consequences of their own actions. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family members who took your generosity for granted? How did you reclaim your power? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming toxic dynamics and finding your true strength. Remember, your peace is worth protecting.